did you struggle to have an outlook, let alone a positive outlook?
I think, and I've talked to a lot of my community members and colleagues in the LGBTQ community that are maybe 10, 15 years older than me. And I always thought I'm just not somebody who can even picture anything in my life 5 to 10 years ahead from now. And I always thought that was very unique to me. The more I learn about queer theory and LGBTQ populations, I think generally kind of our existence on this planet and the constant historical framework and trauma around the questioning of our identities and HIV and all of the things that surround our community, that it's not abnormal for LGBTQ folks to not see a future for themselves.
Hmm.
I think that's changing now in younger populations because of representation and visibility. But you know, I think a mix of myself not actually ever being able to picture anything in the future when I was younger, but also maybe just part of being in that community and not seeing myself in the future.
Right.
Sure.
From our own experience with our Queer Money podcast, which is 9 years old, and the number of individuals we have interviewed, there has been this kind of common thread of I don't necessarily think that much about planning because I don't think I'm going to be around. I think you mentioned the HIV/AIDS crisis. I think that there's a strong tie to that. This kind of limited outlook that our community has had, and it has actually even trickled through to today. I had an exchange with a young man on TikTok on our comments, and he basically alluded to this idea that he didn't need to save for retirement, that he would either die prematurely or he himself was going to end his life because he wouldn't have the money to be able to retire. And it is kind of a fatalistic outlook that some in our community have.
Yeah, and I agree with that totally. And even thinking about, positive representation in media, there's not many stories where a queer person just gets to be queer and successful and there's always some sort of trauma associated with their story. And
Hmm.
even in leading HMI, I get every day to see these beautiful, resilient, amazing young people. But the way I have to communicate why we do what we do to donors is that they're 4 times as likely to attempt suicide.
Right.
Mhm.
So there's like this balance of the perception of who we are in community and our resilience in community versus actually who we are. And I think each of us individually tries to navigate that in a really challenging way.
Right. Now you said you think that's kind of changing a little bit. Why do you think that is? Can you give us some indications so maybe we can feel a little bit better?
Yeah. I mean, I do think, current context aside, I do think that you can just see people who are like you more visibly and more present in leadership positions, in media, doing good things in organizations like HMI. I mean, uh, I just turned 45, and I remember growing up and being in college, and I went to college in Tennessee, and it was like, "Do you think she is? Do you think she is?" And it was just all these like whisperings of, and not ever being able to have an open conversation. And I think the thing that's great now is that at organizations like HMI and in companies like Yahoo and all over the world, it can be an open conversation. How are you and your spouse saving? Are you thinking about having kids? How are you approaching that? And before, it was something you had to figure out on yourself without a wealth of resources on the internet or anything like that. So now I just think there's volumes of information. It's just sorting through to make sure that it's positive and correct.